All right, so looking at your mobility, you can come over in here. Your trunk rotation is tight, so you're gonna have a hard time keeping your trunk back as your hips are opening. Your hip abduction's a little tight too, so you're gonna have a hard time continuing to move laterally down the mound, which allows you to build momentum before rotation. You're gonna wanna rotate too early. Your ankles are a little weak, so you gotta get your lower half stronger. Your hip rotation, left internal, which your lefty, is really tight. So here's the thing. Direct correlation to hip tightness and arm pain and arm injury. So notice how your hip internal right is 25, that one's 5 degrees less. It was already restricted to start with, and it's what it means, it's breaking down. So just from a lot of pitching, we sit and torque into that hip. That's tightened up, and you already had tightness, but that's the one thing that tightens up. Then this starts to have to lead in front of it, causing more of the medial elbow pain. So we have to restore that range of motion so we can free up the arm, basically. And a lot of guys that have Tommy John, they had hip pain before Tommy John. So they started having hip pain, the arm started to push ahead to overcompensate, and then they wound up having Tommy John. And they correlate to each other. Hip flexion is trunk forward. You're gonna have a little hard time getting your trunk out. Hip extension side, so you do have a lot of hip tightness and upper back tightness. Now, on your speed side, like, I think it looks like you haven't done your 10-yard yet, but decent strength. Was that 520? Yeah, decent strength and probably decent speed. And you're a little, how old are you?
60.
Yeah, you're above average on the athleticism side. I mean, we can still drive this up. So you're quick, so you're able to put a lot of forces or speeds through your joints. But the problem is, if you have restrictions, then that can ruin your joints, right? It's the catch-22. We need speed, but if we don't have a lot of time, which is range of motion, to accelerate the speed and decelerate the speed, and it has to happen in shorter intervals, then it creates more damage to the body. So the point is, we start clearing up a lot of the mobility, you'll feel a lot of release of stress because you're not having to accelerate so quickly in such a short amount of time.
Okay.
The challenge, the thing's gonna happen is you're gonna improve your mobility and you're gonna wanna throw harder. Because at the end of the day, that's what happens. You're already peaking stress in your joint. So even if you could go faster, your joint's like, I'm not going any faster. So we clear this up, you'll feel less stress at the speed you're at, but you're also gonna wanna go to another speed. At the end of the day, that's just learning how to sequence this better, how to get even stronger, because your grip strength is poor, which would protect that. So the point is, like, it's not enough just to alleviate your mobility, because you're going to want to go to another level of speed, which then could continue to hurt you. We need to get stronger, we need to get the mechanics better, and that just keeps helping the process. And we need to make sure we don't overthrow. We got to understand proper what we call stress management. Okay. So coming out of leg lifts, so on top of you having not a lot of abduction, which is your leg going this way, you lean back into it, slamming into range early. That's why I know they teach hip leads, but they're horrible if it's going to collapse your back hip, push you into range, because now you're stuck. It's like, I can move forward like this, I can move forward going to what we call torsion and squatting. I can only move forward so long, and I lean back in the joint. Now I'm stuck. Like, this joint won't go any farther forward. So that's a too far, you're leaning too far. So now all you can do here is just swing open and collapse down. And that's what happens. You just swing open and you collapse down. You know it's collapsing because it's going internal. The elite guy, he's still squatting and moving forward. And this is holding externally. So then when he opens it fires internally. You're at that point here, so when you're opening, you're collapsing and it's losing power. And the thing is when this hip loses power, this arm has to lead to make up for it. And that creates all the arm stress. So this collapses into landing. Your trunk is trying its best to stay closed, which is good. But what we got to look at now, you have positionally good hip to shoulder separation. So it looks like this hip is leading, but we don't really know how well it's doing until we look at the speed. So this is called the kinematic sequence. This graph is looking at time this way, degrees per second this way. So that's how fast something's rotating. Just like in the avatar, the red is the hip, the green is the trunk. And notice how if something's going fast on this graph, it's going up and down really quick. Kind of your trunk's kind of doing that. So your arm does it even faster. It actually goes so fast you can't catch it. So notice how right as you landed, your hips died. And that's a collapsing hip. So think about it, a collapsing hip, it can pick up speed as it's collapsing, but once it lands, there's no energy. If it's a driving hip, as it's coming down, it's starting to accelerate, but as it's landing, boom, it's accelerating. And you would actually see the full curve.
Okay.
Your curve's cut off.
So that's like where he's collapsing.
Yeah. So that collapsing is going to force the arm to overcompensate. Why? Because this hip pulls away from this shoulder, which is driving the shoulder. So that means this is the power point. So if this dies, then what's this gonna do? It's gonna die too, but it's like, well, I have to throw the ball, so it goes. And then all that impact to do that is what destroys the arm. So you wanna fix your arm, you have to fix that curve. And notice how there's this blue one actually trying to fix your curve. Notice how the blue actually tries to create the curve. What is that? That's the glove. So that's how it works. When this collapses and doesn't power rotation for the back shoulder, the glove goes, okay, I'll help out. And the glove goes like that. So the glove pulls. The problem with the glove pull is it'll pull away from the arm. It'll pull the trunk away from the arm. And the arm will then drag, and the arm's like trying to catch up. Stress, right? And then it can only go so far because it goes this way and it stops you and your arm's like, I'm not done. And then your arm goes like that. So the glove is trying to help the hip, but putting more stress to the arm. So then as you see, as this pulls, your arm is trying to keep up because it wants to keep momentum accelerating. So it didn't drag too bad, but it did push ahead right there. Look at that. So the studies show when your elbow pushes in front of your face, your torques are through the roof. Because it'd be like, just watch your arm. Like if I took your arm and if I laid it back here, that's not too bad. But if I put your arm out here and I went like that, that's not what you want, right? You can handle those torques here, but you can't handle those torques there, right? Okay, so that's the problem, is that push. And you wouldn't have that push if your trunk hadn't stopped. But see, the thing is what's driving the trunk is the hip. So the hip gets to here and dies. So that means the trunk can really only go to there. So the trunk goes to there. Notice this point where the hip died. It died right here. Watch when the trunk dies. The trunk gets right here and it's at its peak. Its peak needed to be out here pushing forward so the arm didn't have to go ahead. So the point is if the hip runs at a speed here, then that's as only as far as the trunk can go. Now, at that point, your arm's like, well, I can't release back here. The ball will go 10 feet over the catcher. So now I've got to push my arm all the way out here. And that pushing of your arm is what's destroying your arm.
That's all that added
So
stress.
is that
Right.
why I would get something like with tricep stuff?
Right, so what you're doing is the tricep gets into deceleration. So you're pushing, creating the medial stress. Then it's turning over and accelerating really fast because that push creates a lot more aggressive arm speeds. And then your decelerators are trying to keep up back here. They're all wearing out. So you're wearing this out, which is your accelerators. Your accelerators because it's resisting external rotation. And then you're wearing all this out is your decelerators as it's trying to decelerate external rotation. You know, the crazy thing is like a lot of aggressive arm speed creates good spin. But you're trying to balance this out. You're trying to balance out the stress on your arm. You're trying to balance out better use of the kinetic chain to get the stress of your arm and get your velocity up. And you're trying to keep this looking good. But right now, you've fallen into injury, and that's what we have to fix this. So just going back to the drawing board, if we collapse this hip, it's going to kill this trunk, and then all these overcompensators start happening, which is too hard on your arm. So we fix the hips and the mobility and the power to power the hips. Then we get the trunk with more energy going forward, then your arm's not having to overcompensate for that.